For years, a war has raged between the humanoid species blessed by the god of light and the demons of the god of darkness, and after a long and deadly battle, a group of heroes have finally made it to the Demon Lord's castle to put a stop to this. However, along the way, there were several casualties, and right outside the throne room, the team is attacked by a demon baddie. Theron tells Kyle and Urza to go on without him while he handles the demon on his own. So they continue moving, but they both know Theron isn't making it out of that alive. They make their way into the throne room, but all of a sudden, Kyle is attacked by several spheres of dark matter from above. He is able to block a few of them, but he can't handle this many, so the mage, Urza, jumps in front of him to block the shot, but in the process, she is completely disintegrated. After Urza's death, the Demon Lord finally shows himself because he is ready to battle Kyle to the death, and the hero is so enraged that he charges in head first without thinking. The Demon Lord launches more dark matter blasts at Kyle, and luckily he manages to duck behind a pillar to avoid getting hit, but after seeing what the attack did, he is starting to get worried. The attack the Demon Lord used is called Elimination, an unblockable high-level spell that destroys everything it comes into contact with. As long as the Demon Lord possesses magic like that, Kyle will never be able to get close enough to land a significant blow, so he has no choice but to do something risky. He believes he should be able to take the Demon Lord out if he releases all the energy in the magic gem of his sword, but doing so is so dangerous that he likely won't survive. He is well aware of the risks, but he has no choice, so he releases the full power of the sword and charges forward to break through the Demon Lord's defenses. With the extra boost in power, Kyle is able to stab clean through the Demon Lord's body and completely destroy him. But in the process, Kyle's sword is completely destroyed and he is severely injured. He managed to save the world, but in the process, he lost everyone he swore to protect in the first place. His friends, his family, and even his home were all destroyed by the demons, so he doesn't feel like he won at all. A few moments later, Kyle collapses from his wounds, and he is okay with his impending death because he has nothing left to live for. But suddenly, the Demon Lord's magic gem returns, and the power inside it is beginning to overload. With the Demon Lord gone, there is no one to control its power. And if that thing goes out of control, then it could destroy the entire world. Kyle crawls his way over to the gem in an attempt to stop it from exploding, and as soon as he grabs hold of it, he gets caught up in a flash of bright light. The next time he opens his eyes, Kyle finds himself in his childhood bed, and he is extremely confused because this shouldn't be possible. He gets out of bed and walks over to the window thinking this must be a dream, but sure enough, when he looks outside, he sees his hometown in all its glory. The same hometown he once watched burn to the ground after a demon attack. The sight brings a tear to his eye, but after everything he has been through, he still can't accept that this is reality. Just then, his childhood friend, Lise, comes into the room looking for Kyle, and as soon as he sees her, he freezes up. Lise notices that Kyle is acting strange, so she asks him if everything is alright, but he doesn't say a word. He still believes all this is just a hallucination, but at this point he doesn't care, he's just happy to see Lise again, so he hugs her as tight as he can. Lise gets flustered and asks Kyle what he's doing, but Kyle is too stuck in the moment to respond. She tries to pull away from him, but Kyle doesn't let her go, so they both lose balance and end up falling onto the bed. Now that Kyle is on top of her, the tension is palpable, and he is ready to go all the way. But at this point in time, Kyle and Lise don't have that kind of relationship yet, and after everything he has done, her embarrassment has officially turned to anger, so she pushes him away and punches him so hard that he flips through the air 3 times. Kyle is now writhing in pain on the bed, and Lise yells at him for trying to pull something like that with no warning. She doesn't know what's wrong with him today, and she normally wouldn't be so angry because she likes him too, but she'd appreciate a little heads up next time, so she can be emotionally prepared. Lise then storms out of the room, leaving Kyle to think about what he has done. But while Kyle is thinking, he realizes that he actually felt Lise's punch, and it hurt a lot. If this were really a dream, then he shouldn't be able to feel pain at all, so there's a possibility that this is the real world. Kyle then gets up to lift the sheets off, and to his surprise, he sees the Demon Lord's magic gem lying there, so he now knows for certain that this is the real world. He walks over to the mirror to take a proper look at himself, and he realizes he looks a lot younger than he did before. On top of that, he clearly remembers suffering several fatal injuries after the battle with the Demon Lord, yet now his body is perfectly healthy. Furthermore, his hometown is back to normal, and Lise is alive, so he comes to the conclusion that he must have returned to the past somehow, and the only clue he has in regards to the cause is this magic gem. He knows the Demon Lord's magic power was immense, but even then, a spell that allows you to return to the past should be impossible to create. Just then, Kyle's stomach growls because he hasn't eaten yet, so he heads downstairs to get some food. When he walks into the kitchen, he is surprised to find a full meal laid out for him, and he realizes that Lise must have made it for him before she left. He remembers how Lise would often come over to cook for him since he and his mom never had the time, and he is very grateful for her help. He sits down and pulls out a bowl to taste the food, and he absolutely loves it. It has been years since he has gotten to eat proper food since on the battlefield. He had to survive off calorie rations in the middle of nowhere. A few minutes later, Theron comes downstairs because he's hungry too, but once he sees all the empty plates in front of Kyle, he realizes he was too late. Kyle even finished the entire pot of stew too, and while Theron is complaining about all the food being gone, Kyle thinks about how absurd this whole thing is. Up until a moment ago, the two of them were fighting alongside one another against the Demon Lord, but he ended up sacrificing himself so Kyle could finish their mission. Theron notices Kyle staring at him, so he turns around and asks him if something is wrong. Kyle snaps out of it and says he's alright, but he still doesn't know how far into the past this is, so he asks Theron what year this is. Theron is a little confused since that's an odd question to ask, but he tells Kyle that today is the 24th of May in the year 2823. Kyle can't believe what he just heard, so he asks Theron if he's sure that's today's date, and Theron tells him he is serious. Today happens to be Kyle's birthday, so Theron says he will forgive him for finishing all the food, but he is still starving, so he plans to go get something to eat from Lise. Although, he's probably going to have to get down on his knees and beg before she'll agree to feed him. Something like this is pretty normal for Theron since there's no such thing as pride when it comes to food for him. But while he's doing that, Kyle stays in the kitchen because he has to put some serious thought into his next move. If he really has returned to the past, then he's going to need to talk to his mom about this. He heads out to the shed and goes down into the library to find his mom, and when he finally spots her, he's happy to see her again, but he can't get the image of her brutal death in the future out of his mind. His mom is surprised to see him because Kyle never comes down into the library at night, but he points out that it's already morning, so she must have spent the entire night reading without realizing it. She apologizes for spending so much time down here, but that's not why Kyle came. He tells her he actually has a question about magic theory, and as one of the few archmages in the country, he figured she'd be the best person to ask. His mom says she'll gladly listen to his question, so Kyle asks her if there are any spells in the world that can send a person back in time. Kyle's mom answers, saying spells like that do exist, and he is surprised because he has never heard of a time spell before. His mother goes on to explain that not much is known about time magic, and while they know it exists, no one would be able to use it. The reason the spell can't be used is because it requires an unfathomable amount of magic power, so there isn't a mage in the world who could possibly pull it off. And even if the greatest mage in all of history were to attempt the spell with every ounce of magic in their body, they would barely be able to travel a single second back in time. Kyle asks if it would theoretically be possible to travel years back in time with the help of a magic item, and now that his mom thinks about it, using a magic item to store power would make time travel possible. But it would take over 1,000 years to store that much energy, so she doesn't think it would work. Kyle asks her if it'd be possible for someone to use the Forbidden Rite, but his mother is more concerned about how he knows of that spell in the first place. Kyle makes up an excuse and says he just read about it in a book and he'd never even dream of attempting it. His mom is relieved to hear that, but the reason she was so worried is because the Forbidden Rite is a spell that allows one to sacrifice life force in exchange for magical power, so it's very dangerous. But even if someone were crazy enough to use it, she still doesn't think it would be possible to use time travel magic effectively. You would need to sacrifice the lives of half of all the humanoids on the continent to pull something like that off, and as far as she knows, there's no one capable of such an atrocity. Besides, there's no catalyst in existence that's capable of storing that much magic power in the first place. But if an artifact like that does exist, then it'd probably be recorded in this book. Kyle's mom flips through the pages of the book, and once she finds what she's looking for, she shows it to Kyle. It's a section about the legendary divine dragon's heart. It is said that the ancient kingdom of Sarles was able to prosper for thousands of years thanks to the power stored inside the gem, but eventually the gem's power was depleted, leading the kingdom to ruin. Kyle's mom believes an artifact as powerful as the dragon heart would be able to store enough power to make time travel possible, but it's been missing for over 1,000 years, so it's possible that it has fallen into the hands of the demons by now. Kyle is starting to piece together what happened, as it's evident that the gem he got from the demon lord must have been the dragon's heart. Kyle's mom thinks it's nice that the two of them are spending time together again because she was worried he has been avoiding her. Kyle apologizes and says he wasn't doing it on purpose, but his mom isn't really mad about it. She's just happy that he came to see her today, and for some reason, she gets the feeling that Kyle is acting a little more mature than usual. Anyway, she remembers Lise saying she'd come over to cook for them today, so she asks Kyle if he wants to go upstairs to eat. But before she leaves, Kyle tells her he actually already ate all the food, and with that single sentence, all the motherly love she felt towards him vanishes for a split second. A moment later, she regains her composure and tells him it's alright since today is his birthday, but she's not going to get him a gift anymore. Talking to his mom was really helpful because Kyle got a lot of useful information from her. Like the fact that this thing is the Divine Dragon's heart and that the Demon Lord most likely pre-programmed the spell into it to send himself back in time. But Kyle still doesn't understand what the Demon Lord would want to go back in time for. Just then, Lise walks up to Kyle, and as soon as he notices her, he begins apologizing for what he did this morning. He tells her he only did it because of a bad nightmare he had, so Lise asks what kind of dream it was. Kyle admits that part of the dream involved her dying, and she now understands why he suddenly hugged her like that. Lise smiles and says she's willing to forgive him since it wasn't his fault, but seeing her smile like that only reminds Kyle of everything he's going to lose in the future. Their village is the closest to the demon territory, so once the invasion begins, they will be the first to suffer the demon's attack. The village ended up being burnt to the ground, and Lise was killed in the chaos of it all. So from that moment on, Kyle swore that he would avenge her. But now she's sitting right in front of him, as alive as ever. Lise asks Kyle if something is wrong since he suddenly got all quiet, but he is deep in thought because if he doesn't do something soon, then 3 years from now he is going to lose everyone he loves again. He refuses to let things end the same way, so no matter what it takes, he swears to himself that he will change the future and save everyone from their cruel fate. Kyle needs to be ready for the day of the Great Cataclysm 3 years from now, so the next day he begins his training and creates a mental image of the Demon Lord to fight against. He charges forward at the mental image, but after countering a few attacks, he realizes his body is weak as hell compared to how it was before. Although it's kind of expected since by this point in time, Kyle had been living like a certified bum for years, so his compatibility absolutely sucks. However, he seems to have retained his increased magic stats from the future, so he tries to make up for the lack of strength by casting speed and strength enhancement on his body. But unfortunately, that doesn't do much to fix his uncoordinated body, so he still fails instantly. Kyle realizes that he needs to put in a lot of work to make his body strong enough to handle his magic power, so he is determined to continue his training. Meanwhile, Lise and Theron have been spying on him from the bushes, and from their perspective, Kyle has just been yelling and falling over by himself all morning, so they are starting to get seriously worried. Just then, Theron's mom, Layla, shows up, and she wants to know what the two of them are up to. They both explain that Kyle has been working really hard lately, which is weird since a few days ago, he couldn't care less about his training. Layla has no idea what caused such a drastic change in Kyle, but if she had to guess, she thinks he might be doing it for a girl he likes. Hearing that crushes Lisa's hopes since Kyle hasn't confessed to her or anything, so she assumes he must have fallen in love with someone else and proceeds to shake him out of anger, causing him to throw up. Lise realizes she took things too far, so to make up for shaking the vomit out of Kyle, she prepares his favorite meal for lunch. Kyle is still upset about being shaken like that for no reason, but he's willing to let it go since she apologized. Anyway, since everyone is here, Kyle tells them he has a question he'd like to ask. He wants to know the best way to force multiple nations to take action, and everyone is a bit confused since it's an odd question to ask at dinner, but his mom puts some thought into it, and there are a few ways he can force nations into action. One would be to get the kings on his side, or to become an influential figure like a priest or a hero, but if all else fails, he could always grow a mustache and commit war crimes to get the nation's attention. Kyle thanks his mom for the advice, but he needs to rally the nation's leaders within the next 2 years, and of all the options she has given, the only thing he can feasibly accomplish before then is to become a great hero. Kyle heads to his room and immediately starts reading every book available to plan out his path, and knowing what's coming in the future is really helpful here since he can confirm which legends are true. Just then, Theron comes in to see him, and he's amazed to see Kyle so focused on reading. He sits on the bed and asks if Kyle is really serious about becoming a hero since it's not exactly a job title that you can just apply for, but Kyle is already aware of that. Normally, someone would become a hero by slaying a demon king or something along those lines, but Kyle can't do that yet, so he needs to make preparations. It's a given that all heroes need to have incredible strength, but strength alone won't be enough to get the job done. To put it bluntly, Kyle says he needs to get a lot of money. That doesn't sound like a very heroic goal to Theron, but Kyle is completely serious. As a hero, he can't go around accepting rewards for his heroic deeds, but equipment and traveling costs are pretty expensive, so he's going to need a decent bit of money saved up if he's going to pull this off. Aside from that, he also plans to gain favor with as many influential people as possible to raise his notoriety, but this is starting to sound like Kyle is trying to become a politician instead of a hero. Aside from money and connections, Kyle also says he's going to need a lot of luck, because heroes need to show up at the right place and time when things go wrong. Theron is starting to get worried that Kyle might really be taking the mustache route, but Kyle assures him that he doesn't plan to create any problems just so he can save the day. But he won't deny that he plans to use underhanded tactics to achieve his goals. Theron really doesn't think a hero should be saying stuff like that, but while they're both here anyway, he asks Kyle why he wants to become a hero. He can tell that being a hero is more like a stepping stone towards an end goal for Kyle, so he wants to know what that end goal is. Kyle admits that he does have his reasons for wanting to be a hero, but he can't share that information right now, so Theron is just going to have to trust him on this. The next morning, Kyle talks to Layla and informs her that he will be going out on an adventure soon, and Layla thinks it's a good idea since it's important to go out and learn about the world. She asks Kyle if he has told his mom yet, and Kyle has already talked to her about it this morning, although he hasn't gotten a chance to talk to Lise yet. Since Kyle will be gone for a while, Layla tells him to take Theron with him. Kyle already intended to have Theron come along, so he thanks Layla for permitting him. But this is the first time Theron is hearing of any of this. After that, Kyle goes to talk to Lise and tells her he will be leaving in 2 days. She seems upset that he will be leaving, but she doesn't want to stop Kyle from reaching his goal, so she asks him where he is going. Kyle tells her that his first stop will be the royal capital, Malad, and once he gets what he needs from there, the real work begins. Lise suddenly says she has a favor to ask, but Kyle already knows what she's going to say, so he tells her he can't let her come with him. She asks him why she can't come even though Theron is going with him. She has been training hard with the Oracle Warriors, so she assures him that she won't be a liability. Kyle says he just wants to be sure that she's in a safe place, and Lise is about to argue, but before she can say another word, Kyle kisses her and says that when he returns, she will be the first person he visits, so he just needs her to have some faith in him. Lise was so flustered by the kiss that she can't argue anymore, so instead she tells Kyle that as long as he promises he won't do anything reckless out there, she is willing to wait for him. The next day, Kyle needs to go shopping for supplies for his trip, so he asks Lise to come with him, but while they are both in town, Lise spots an elf over by one of the stalls. Lise is intrigued because it's unusual to see an elf in this part of the country, but Kyle is even more intrigued because this isn't just any elf, it's Urza. Kyle recalls all the time he spent with Urza in the future and how she loved him so much that she told him her true name, which is a really big deal among elves. He is so stunned by the sight of her that he accidentally blurts out her name, Exis, but he probably shouldn't have done that since in this time, Urza has no idea who he is, so the fact that a random human knows her true name puts her on edge, and she's about to draw her sword on Kyle. Kyle doesn't want Urza to make a scene, so he grabs her arm and tries to get her to calm down, but nothing is working, so he's forced to use her true name to put her to sleep. Urza then falls into Kyle's arms, and that takes care of one problem, but now Kyle has to deal with Lise, who saw the whole thing. Kyle says he has a perfectly good explanation for this, but I mean, from Lise's perspective, he just walked up to a pretty elf girl, put her asleep in the middle of the street, and is now probably going to kidnap her, so he can't really talk his way out of this. After taking Urza back to his house, he tries convincing her that she imagined him saying her true name, but she isn't dumb enough to fall for that. She knows she heard him say it, but the only people who are supposed to know her true name are her parents, so she demands to know where Kyle learned it. Kyle can't exactly explain that 4 years from now, he and Urza become lovers, and she eventually tells him her true name, and even if he did, there's no way she would believe him. Urza threatens to kill Kyle to make sure he doesn't tell anyone her true name, but Kyle asks her to please wait because he will explain everything to her eventually. Urza can't believe Kyle is asking her to trust him with something as important as her true name, so Kyle offers an alternative. He says he is willing to perform an application of the contract with Urza to prevent him from using her true name for evil. Contracts like these are usually formed between humans and spirits, but in special cases, they can be used to bind two people together. The terms of this contract will be that Kyle isn't allowed to reveal Urza's true name to anyone or use it for evil purposes, and if he breaks the terms at any point, then he will immediately die a painful death. Urza is surprised that Kyle is willing to stake his life on this, so she decides to trust him for now, but she currently isn't able to form the contract since she would need a full moon for that, and the next full moon is in 3 weeks, so she says she'll have to stay in town to keep an eye on Kyle until then. However, Kyle tells her that he's actually leaving town tomorrow, so Urza is forced to join him on his journey since she can't risk letting him out of her sight. The next day, everyone has packed their stuff, and they are about to set out, so Kyle says goodbye to his mom. Lise is also going to be joining Kyle now because she doesn't trust him enough to let him travel alone with Urza after how weird he started acting when he first saw her. The group eventually begins their journey, and Theron almost immediately starts flirting with Urza since he wasn't expecting such a pretty girl to randomly join their party. However, Urza insists that she isn't a part of their party, she's just coming along because she has to stay near Kyle until they've formed their contract. But no one was actually listening to her. Anyway, with Urza and their party, Kyle says they don't need to head to the royal capital right away anymore. Instead, they are headed for the Sumgard Mountains to find the Magic Queen's labyrinth. Theron doesn't think it's worth going since they've all heard the legends and that labyrinth is so large that they'll never be able to find the treasure in there. Kyle assures them that they don't have to worry about that because he has prepared a detailed map to lead them through the labyrinth. Kyle made the map using the memories of his adventure through the labyrinth in the future. But since the labyrinth is still uncharted territory at this point in time, the others find it hard to believe that Kyle managed to get his hands on a genuine map, so they think he got scammed. Urza feels kind of bad for Kyle, so she makes up something about the paper being 1,000 years old magic tree paper to make it sound more genuine. Kyle most definitely got that paper from some random book in the library, so he knows Urza is just BSing, but the others don't know that, and they trust Urza's word a lot more than Kyle's, so they immediately believe that the map is real. But even with the map, the labyrinth is still so big that it will take them ages to get to the treasure. However, Kyle has already thought of a solution for that as well, so he tells everyone they are going to dig a tunnel. They begin preparations on the tunnel right away, and with this, they should be able to avoid all the deadly saw traps laid out across the labyrinth. They've even got Urza helping out with an earth spirit to reinforce the tunnel, so it doesn't collapse, and she seems really motivated for some reason, so she urges Kyle and Theron to work even harder. After a long day of digging, everyone heads back to camp where Lise has prepared a delicious meal for them. Everyone loves the food, so Lise tells them they can have as much as they like. After all, she had a lot of ingredients to work with. Urza asks Lise if she was the one who caught the bear because she didn't think Lise was proficient with weapons. But Lise never said she used a weapon, she just beat the bear to death with her bare hands, something that's completely normal for her. After dinner, Urza uses some of her spirit magic to create an artificial hot spring in the middle of the mountain, so she and Lise take a soak in it, and while they're in there, Kyle has to do everything within his power to stop Theron's degenerate butt from jumping over the wall to peep. The next day, everyone gets back to working on the tunnel, but while the others are on their break, Urza approaches Kyle and demands to know why he wants to become a hero so badly. She knows the others haven't been prying for answers from him because they trust his judgment, but Urza doesn't trust him at all. She wants to know what's driving him to work so hard because no ordinary person would go so far just to become a hero. This entire time while working on the tunnel, Kyle has been wearing rings that make his body 9 times as heavy as usual, yet he hasn't once stopped or complained. She asks if his reasons for doing all this have anything to do with how he knows her true name, but before Urza could get a response, Kyle's shovel strikes the wall of the treasure vault, so he cuts Urza off and asks her to go get the others. Once everyone has arrived, Kyle kicks down the wall and they are greeted by a massive pile of treasure. Theron is overjoyed because with this amount of money, he's never going to have to work again. But while he is busy swimming through the gold coins, Kyle sneaks off on his own because there's a secret treasure hidden in this labyrinth that he needs to find. He makes his way over to one of the back rooms, and there he finds the legendary sword that accompanied him in so many battles in the future, and as he approaches the blade, the sword's avatar appears. Sylvie begins her speech congratulating the brave challenger who overcame the trials of the labyrinth, but Kyle suddenly covers her mouth to shut her up because he doesn't want his friends to find out about her yet. Sylvie gets mad and yells at him for daring to treat her with such disrespect, but this has nothing to do with disrespect, he just really needs her to be quiet for a second. Once Sylvie has calmed down, Kyle tells her he knows that she is a copy of the Queen of Sildoniaxarles, and he didn't actually go through all the traps she set in the labyrinth, he just dug a shortcut to get in quickly. Sylvie can't believe Kyle was able to cheat her labyrinth so easily, and Kyle would love to explain how he knew how to get here, but it would be quicker to just go through the final trial so she can see for herself. The final trial in question involves Kyle pulling out the sword so Sylvie can read his memories, and when she does, she gets a full recap of all the tragedies that are going to happen in the future, all the way up to the point where Kyle touches the dragon's heart and is transported back in time. She has a hard time believing that what she just saw was true because she had no idea time magic could be used on such a scale. But if all that was in Kyle's memories, then it has to be true. Just then, the others realize Kyle is missing, so they go looking for him, but Kyle hasn't informed them about any of this stuff yet, so he asks Sylvie to just play along and act like. He grabs the sword, and as his friends approach, he excitedly yells that he found an intelligent sword. A little while later, Sylvie has been introduced to everyone, and she's currently enjoying herself with some of Lisa's cookies, as it's been centuries since she got to eat any actual food. Lisa asks Sylvie if she's really the Magic Queen, but to be more exact, Sylvie is only part of the Magic Queen. She's a magic life form created to evaluate the people who would eventually find this treasure vault, and if she had deemed them unworthy, then she would have had to blow up this entire place. But she thinks Kyle is interesting, so he has her approval for now. She also tells them to bring that bag along since it is connected directly to the treasure vault. Since Kyle has gotten the treasure he needed, he and the others head over to the royal capital. And while they are there, Sylvie keeps trying to run off to go try out all the food stalls, but Theron doesn't want her getting lost. The reason they came here is that they need to get some new equipment, and Kyle knows the perfect place for it. He leads everyone to a weapons store in the middle of town, and this place is pretty exclusive, so when they walk in, the receptionist asks them if they have a recommendation letter or something because kids like them could never afford to buy this stuff here. Kyle recalls that this store requires a membership fee to get service, but with how much treasure they have now, the membership fee isn't something he needs to worry about. He hands the receptionist some gold coins from the treasure vault, and the receptionist can hardly believe what Kyle just gave him, but he did pay the fee, so he tells Kyle and the others they can head in now. Once they are inside, they are introduced to the owner of the shop, Fezba, and he offers to help them pick out the gear they need. Sylvie notices a few swords on the wall, and she recognizes them as some of Melanis's work. Fezba is surprised that she can tell that from just a glance, but she's right. These swords were made by the great craftsman, Melanis, from ancient times. However, Sylvie has actually met Melanis before, and his work wasn't the best, but he threw a tantrum every time she criticized him. Fezba is confused by what Sylvie just said, but before she can say anything else, Kyle steps in and drags her away because they can't let anyone find out that she's the Queen of Magic. Anyway, Fezba begins showing everyone around the shop, and for Kyle, he suggests this set of dragon-scale armor, handcrafted by dozens of underpaid workers and loaded to the gills with resistance magic. Kyle really likes the practicality of the armor, so he decides to buy it, and Fezba is shocked that he made the decision so quickly because this thing is really expensive. Kyle asks Theron if he'd like to get a set of dragon armor as well, but Theron doesn't want to wear a matching suit with Kyle, so he says he will get something else. Kyle is fine with that, and since everyone is here already, Kyle tells them they can grab anything they think they'll need. The others grab things like spirit bracelets, gauntlets for Lys, and arm gear for Theron to boost his power, but it does absolutely nothing for his charisma. Now that they've gotten all the equipment they'll need, Kyle asks Fezba if he has any magic stones in stock, so Fezba shows him one of his most popular items. It's a magic stone enchanted with explosion magic, so it is very useful in offensive combat. Explosion stones are great, but Kyle is actually hoping for something that would be effective against reptile-type monsters, so Fezba shows him a magic stone enchanted with a cold spell. Lizards are weak to the cold, so this should be fairly effective against them. However, it is difficult to enchant a magic stone with a cold spell, so these are rather expensive. Kyle doesn't even bother asking what the price is, he just says he wants to buy every single cold stone that Fezba has in stock. He also wants all of Fezba's healing potions as well, and Fezba is speechless because buying all those potions would cost an astronomical amount of money. Kyle agrees that it's a bit impractical because it would take ages to carry all the coins here. So instead, he just plops a bag of gems worth 10 million coins on the table and says they'll call it even. After that, Kyle and the others leave the store, but Theron is a little worried that rumors about them being rich might start spreading, and they wouldn't want the IRS knocking at their door. Kyle tells him he doesn't have to worry about that because they are leaving the capital tomorrow, but the others are surprised as they didn't know their stay here would be so short. This is the first time Lys or Theron have ever been to the capital, and they want to make the most of it, so Theron runs off to go live his big city dreams, and Urza tells Lys that she'll show her around town. Sylvie also tries to run off to try some more snacks, but Kyle stops her because there's something the two of them need to discuss while the others are gone. Kyle takes Sylvie back to the inn, and once they are inside, he asks her if she thinks the future can really be changed, but Sylvie thinks his question is dumb because the future was never set in stone to begin with. The way she sees it, the spell that brought Kyle back in time probably plucked his soul out of his current timeline and placed him at an earlier point in a different timeline, which is why the dragon heart that he used as a catalyst is in his possession, even though the dragon heart of this timeline is still out there somewhere. Kyle's very presence in this timeline is bound to cause changes, but at this rate, the Great Invasion is still bound to happen at some point, so they'll need to do something about that. Knowing that his actions can change the course of fate is good enough for Kyle, so he's willing to do whatever it takes to save the world, but there is still one thing he is curious about. There are currently 2 dragon hearts in this world because of the time travel, but if that's how it works, then Kyle wonders why there's only one of him here. Sylvie has a theory about this as well, so she tells Kyle about one of the most forbidden forms of magic out there, soul fusion. In this world, a person's max magic power is determined at birth, and no amount of training can change that, but back in the prime of Syldonia, they discover that the magic power of a person could be increased by fusing 2 souls together. Naturally, they performed experiments on infants with artificial souls, but it ended in a catastrophic failure, so soul fusion was categorized as forbidden magic. Regarding what happened to Kyle, Sylvie believes that the souls of the Kyle from the future and the Kyle from the past were fused together, and thankfully, since they were the exact same, it seems to have happened without any major complications. As a result, his magic power was practically doubled, so Kyle should be way stronger than he was in the previous timeline. He may even be able to use the highest form of magic, but whether he can master is another story entirely. This is an unprecedented case, so Sylvie has no idea what implications or side effects it may have on Kyle. With that said, she tells him she'll give him advice if anything comes up, so he had better tell her as soon as he feels anything off. Later that night, Lise and Urza return from their sightseeing, and Lise is ready to go to sleep, but Urza says she'll stay up for a little longer since she enjoys the sight of the full moon since it only happens once a month. Hang on, the only reason she's here is because she had to stay near Kyle until the full moon so she could perform the contract, but she completely forgot, and the night is almost over so she has to find Kyle quickly. Kyle was out in the forest training with Sylvie when Urza suddenly comes running up to him. She reminds him that tonight is a full moon, so they need to do the contract ritual now. Kyle had completely forgotten about that, and he's still willing to go through with the contract, but he has been training for hours already, and he was just about to go to sleep, so he asks her if they can just do it next month instead. Urza refuses because she can't just leave things as they are, so Kyle eventually agrees and Urza begins drawing the contract circle. While she was growing up, Urza always saw the contract of application as a sign of commitment between lovers, and she'd always see it done at the weddings in her village, so she had hoped she would get to experience it one day. But she never could have expected that it would happen like this. She eventually finishes drawing the circle, so she tells Kyle she's ready to begin. However, Kyle has been asleep for a while now. Urza yells at him to get up already because they need to get this done before the night ends, so Kyle wakes up and the two of them stand in the middle of the circle. Kyle recalls how he and Urza performed the ceremony back when they got married in the other timeline, so after he vows not to use Urza's true name for evil, he steps forward and kisses her. Urza is so stunned that she doesn't react initially, but when she finally processes what's happening, she pushes Kyle away and demands to know what he thinks he is doing. Kyle doesn't understand why she's so upset since this is just the final step of sealing the contract, but Urza tells him that there's only a kiss at the end when the contract is being done for a marriage, and this wasn't meant to be a marriage contract, so Urza is pissed. The next morning, Kyle and the others start leaving the capital. Lise notices that the others look awfully tired. Kyle says he and Urza were up late at night because of a little incident, but Urza doesn't want to talk about it. As for Theron, he was up all night trying to get a girlfriend, but even though he's rich now, he had no such luck. Anyway, the group is headed for Arkan now, but Kyle didn't want to explain why, so he just told everyone that Sylvie has a prophetic ability that said they should go there. Upon arriving in Arkan, the group just so happens to show up right when Princess Melina is having a town visit. Melina is a kind princess, beloved by all her people, so the others are excited to see her, but Kyle is the only one who knows that 2 days from now, Melina is fated to die. In 2 days, Melina's caravan will head to the village of Scenes. Along the way, she will be attacked by a Hydra and killed. Scenes was recently attacked by Hydras, so Melina's plan was to go there to show her support for the region, which ultimately led to her demise. Kyle thinks what happened is the natural result of her poor choices, since going to the village of Scenes while it's still dangerous, even out of kindness, was a dumb decision. Sylvie asks if it's possible that Melina was assassinated, and it was covered up to make it look like a monster attack, and Kyle admits that there were rumors that Melina's brother, Prince Karanes, was behind it, but no evidence was ever found regarding his involvement. It was ultimately deemed an unfortunate accident, and Kyle plans to use that unfortunate accident to his advantage, so he can become a hero. But he's going to have to be careful about how he does it since he needs to make it look natural when he saves her. But he has no idea where or when exactly the attack will happen, so he's going to have to keep an eye on the princess. Just then, Theron walks in, and he's disappointed because he just spent the last few hours trying to figure out Princess Melina's route for tomorrow, but he found nothing. Kyle is surprised and asks why Theron is so interested in Melina's route, so he explains that he plans to follow Melina around, and the second she gets into danger, he will swoop in to save her so she falls in love with him. Kyle is disappointed that he came up with the same plan as someone like him. But to be clear, Kyle explains that he's not following Melina for any creepy reason, he just has reason to believe that she might be in danger, so he needs to make sure she stays safe. Theron gets excited once he realizes that Melina really is in danger, because that means as long as he stalks her long enough, he's gonna get a chance to save her life. The next morning, Melina's caravan leaves, so Kyle and the others are waiting out in the forest so they can keep tabs on her. However, Urza asks Kyle how exactly they are going to do that when they can't get close to Melina without drawing too much attention. Fortunately, Sylvie has the perfect ability for the job, so she transforms herself into a hawk and flies onto Kyle's shoulder. The others are shocked since they had no idea that was even possible, but Sylvie explains that her real body is the gem inside the sword, and her physical form is just a manifestation made from her magical energy, so she can turn into anything she wants. As a hawk, there's no way anyone would notice her following Melina's carriage, and as an added bonus, she can give the others a real-time feed of what she's seeing using her gemstone. Urza is amazed by how versatile Sylvie is, because with an ability like this, it would be possible to spy on anyone without them knowing. A few moments later, Sylvie informs everyone that something strange is going on, but it's not monsters like Kyle thought it would be. Instead, the drivers of Melina's carriage suddenly stopped and started attacking Melina's guards for no reason. This is really bad, so Kyle tells the others they need to hurry before something bad happens to the princess. Over by the carriage, the drivers have just finished eliminating all of Melina's guards, so they move on to the next step of their plan and cover the carriage in some mysterious powder. Just then, Kyle and the others arrive, and before the drivers can even respond, Kyle uses haste magic to dash forward and knock them both out in an instant. Now that the guards have been incapacitated, the others tie them up so they can be questioned later, and Theron goes to check inside the carriage to see if the princess is alright. She seems to be unconscious, but other than that, she is thankfully unharmed. However, keeping her that way might be a little harder than they thought, because the group is suddenly surrounded by a horde of hellhounds. They all start doing their best to fend the hellhounds off, but there are so many of them that a few manage to slip past and go for the unconscious drivers. So much for Kyle's plan to interrogate them, but the group has bigger issues to deal with, because if they don't do something soon, and the same thing might happen to Princess Melina. Kyle asks Theron if he can drive the carriage so they can get out of here, but the carriage reins have been cut, and it will take at least a few minutes for him to get it fixed. On a side note, those are some of the nonchalant horses I've ever seen. Soon after, Kyle hears loud footsteps heading in this direction, and if it's what he thinks it is, then this is really bad. He tells Theron to stay near the princess and protect her no matter what, while the others should keep fending off the wolves. As for him, he says he's going out to handle what's coming on his own. Lee's objects and tells Kyle it's too risky, but he says he's the only one who stands a chance of beating it, and he promises not to do anything too risky. Lise and Urza have no choice but to trust Kyle, so they go back to fighting the hellhounds while he makes his way deeper into the forest. As Kyle is running, Sylvie asks him if he really thinks he will be able to defeat a Hydra on his own, and he is fairly confident that he can do this. As far as Hydras go, their strength is determined by the number of heads they have, and Kyle has beaten one with 3 heads before, so as long as it's not more than that, he should be fine. Kyle eventually confronts the Hydra, and after taking a quick look at it, he counts 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's a lot more than 3 heads. The Hydra has 8 heads in total, and Kyle didn't really account for this, so Sylvie asks him if they should run. However, it's too late to retreat now, so Kyle has no choice but to face the Hydra. Hydras have simple attack patterns, so dodging it won't be too much of a challenge, but the Hydra also possesses scales that make it practically immune to sword strikes. However, that's not even the worst part about dealing with one. It also has incredibly foul poison breath that kills all living things that come into contact with it. Normally, getting hit with a blast point blank would be a death sentence, but that poison resistance from the dragon armor is really coming in handy right now. Kyle knew he would probably have to face a Hydra here, which is why he spent so much money buying all these magic crystals in the first place, and those cold spells are going to be really helpful here. He throws one of the cold crystals at the Hydra, and once the spell activated, it freezes the Hydra in place, buying Kyle enough time to throw an explosive crystal at it and cause a decent amount of damage. The combination of ice and explosion magic is enough to weaken the Hydra's scales, so Kyle is now able to slice off one of its heads. Sylvie is impressed that Kyle is holding his ground so well against a Hydra, but the battle is nowhere near done, because on top of all the Hydra's other abilities, it is also able to regenerate, so simply cutting its head off isn't enough to finish it off. Kyle continues throwing his ice stones at the Hydra to weaken it, but he's down to his last ice stone, and the Hydra's regeneration doesn't look like it's slowing down. So Kyle has to finish quickly with one final blow. He has a plan in mind, but it's risky, so he's only going to get one shot at this. He clutches all the remaining explosion stones in his hand and casts haste on himself, so he can dash straight towards the Hydra. He then cuts a hole straight into its chest and jams his fist in there with the explosion stones. The Hydra smacks him away shortly after, but by then it was already too late because Kyle had accomplished his goal. All the explosion stones he put in the Hydra were activated, resulting in a huge explosion that absolutely obliterates the Hydra. With this, Kyle has successfully won his first battle as a hero, but the fact that he got covered in Hydra guts as a result is unfortunate. Back at the carriage, the others are finally done taking out the hellhounds, so they want to go help Kyle since they are worried about him. But a moment later, Kyle walks out of the bushes, and they are relieved to see that he is unharmed. They think it's amazing that he was able to kill a Hydra on his own, but they are noticeably less excited once Kyle gets closer because he smells like crap. They are still happy he made it back alive, but until he cleans himself up, they don't want to be anywhere near him, so they run away. After a few minutes of washing up, Kyle heads back over to the others by the carriage and asks them how things are going in here. Everything is fine, but Melina and her maids are still unconscious. Kyle assumes they must have been drugged since they've been unconscious for a long time now, so he asks Urza to use some of the antidote potion he bought to see if that does something. While Urza is doing that, Farron takes a look around the carriage and he finds a strange bag just sitting on the floor outside. Kyle assumes the drivers must have used the powder inside to lure the monsters here, so they kill Melina and make her death look like an unfortunate accident. So in other words, when Melina died in the past timeline, it wasn't just an unfortunate accident, it was a carefully thought out assassination. Meanwhile, back in the city, Prince Carnes and the Knight Captain are in a dark room together, and when one of the cards on the table goes dark, Zentos says it's time to send a squad out to confirm whether the mission was successful or not. As night falls, Melina has finally recovered from the sedative, so she opens her eyes and she is surprised to see that she's still alive. The last thing she remembers was being drugged and put to sleep, so she was certain that today would be the day she died, but it looks like she still has some luck on her side. She asks if they're the ones who saved her life, and Theron immediately tries to take all the credit, until Lisa knocks him out before he can do anything that would make a fool of them. Kyle bows in front of Melina and explains that he and his friends happened to be nearby when they saw Melina's guards being attacked by the drivers, so they intervened and saved her life. A moment later, Melina's maids wake up and Arca sees her talking to Kyle, so her first instinct is to get in front of Melina and protect her. If only she had that type of energy when Melina was getting drugged, but Arca is just genuinely worried about Melina's safety, especially after what happened earlier. Melina tells her there's no need to worry because Kyle doesn't seem like a bad person, and even though she doesn't know much about him, she does know that she wouldn't be alive right now without his help, so she sincerely thanks him. She gets up because she wants to see the situation outside, and Kyle warns her that it's not a pretty sight, but she needs to see the current state of things with her own eyes. After examining the drivers, she asks Kyle if any of her guards managed to survive, but unfortunately, all of them had been killed by the time Kyle and the others got here, so Melina and her maids are the only survivors. Just then, Sylvie informs Kyle that a group of soldiers from Arkan is heading this way, so Kyle relays the information to Melina. But as soon as she hears that the King's Guard is on its way, she becomes panicked and tells Kyle that they need to get out of here immediately. Kyle is surprised by her reaction because he thought she'd be happy to hear that soldiers from her kingdom are on their way to help, but she tells him that those soldiers aren't here to save her, they are probably coming to make sure she died. She has given it some thought, and the person behind the assassination attempt is most likely the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Zentos, and she's sure Zentos must have ordered those soldiers to kill her on sight, so she can't let them find her alive. Melina instructs Arca to burn all the bodies here to trick the soldiers into thinking the princess is among the corpses, and in the meantime, everyone else should get onto the carriage because they need to get out of here as soon as possible. Everyone is confused, but they go along with Melina's orders, and just before getting on the carriage, Theron throws the sack of monster-attracting powder into her flames in hopes of delaying the soldiers with a sudden monster attack. Once that's done, Arca takes the reins of the carriage and everyone rides away, but Kyle is left wondering what he should do next because he didn't think he'd get himself involved in something as serious as a royal assassination plot so soon. Kyle asks Melina if she's absolutely certain that Zentos is behind this, but she knows what she heard. Yesterday, she got drugged by the prince and Zentos, and before she passed out, she could hear her brother celebrating because she had actually fallen for the trap. Now all he needed to do was put her in a carriage headed for Sains and tell everyone that she foolishly chose to go there despite the danger, and before long, she'd end up as monster food. She knew her brother was a greedy bastard, but she never really saw him as a threat since he is so incompetent, but with Zentos on his side, he could actually become a real problem. Normally, Melina would be escorted by Kilrin in the 5th Battalion to ensure her safety, but with how popular Kilrin is, she is often called away to take part in ceremonies in the royal capital. So this time, Zentos was put in charge of protecting Melina. Now that she thinks about it, she probably should have been wary of the fact that her brother came along in the first place, because he had no reason for being here. Kyle is still finding it hard to believe that Zentos was really involved in the assassination attempt, but he is certain that Melina isn't lying, so he has to accept that Zentos is his enemy now. He tells Melina that since the assassination attempt failed, they are sure to try something else, and knowing Zentos, he probably already came up with a backup plan. He's most likely going to try and pin everything on Kyle and the others and paint them as heinous criminals who slaughtered Melina's escorts to get to her. The smartest thing for them to do would be to ditch Melina to ensure their own safety, but it's kinda too late for that, so Melina tells them that she will reward them handsomely once they get back to the royal capital safely. On the bright side, they have a few things going in their favor, like the fact that Kilrin's 5th Battalion is scheduled to arrive in Archon tomorrow morning. And once they find out that Melina isn't there, Kilrin is sure to come looking for her. Kyle asks if it'd be bad if Kilrin's battalion were to run into Zento's battalion, but Melina says the two battalions are roughly equal in strength, so if anything, it'd cause more trouble for Zentos than for them. If that's the case, Theron suggests that they could just hide out in Sains until the situation blows over, but Kyle doesn't think it's a good idea since Zentos would probably just destroy the entire village to keep things quiet. Lise asks if he'd really go that far, but he has already killed a few royal guards to get to Melina, so it stands to reason that he won't stop when faced with 100 villagers. It's risky, but Kyle thinks the best course of action right now would be to head back to Archon since the city has over 10,000 people living there, and there's no way Zentos would be able to kill all of them. Plus, if they can meet up with Kilrin's battalion, they might stand a good chance of surviving. Melina agrees with Kyle's plan, but if they turn back now, they are bound to run into Zentos' men, so she asks him if he has a plan in mind to slip past them. But Kyle calmly explains that he plans to cut straight through Zentos' men. They stop the carriage to prepare, and thanks to Sylvie's surveillance, they are able to figure out that Zentos isn't with his battalion. Since Zentos isn't here, they just need to focus on defeating the regular soldiers, and luckily, Kyle already has a plan for that, but it involves a lot of explosion stones. They can't guarantee that Melina won't be hurt by the shockwaves, so Lise gives her a case of high healing potions and tells her to drink one if she's injured in any way. Melina is a bit shocked by how much equipment Kyle's team has since this stuff must have cost a fortune, and it did, but money's not a problem for them. Meanwhile, back in the capital, the prince is freaking out because the assassination attempt failed. Zentos assures him that he has already sent his men out to finish the princess off, but the prince wants to know why Zentos isn't out there searching for her with his battalion. Zentos explains that Kilrin is going to arrive tomorrow morning, and when she realizes that the princess isn't here, she's bound to question the prince about her. And the prince is a walking mess when it comes to thinking on his feet, so Zentos needs to be by his side to come up with an excuse for him. The prince can't argue with that, but he reminds Zentos that now that he's involved in his plan, he won't tolerate any more screw-ups from him. As the soldiers continue chasing Melina's carriage, one of the scouts they sent ahead runs back to report that he just saw the carriage turn around, so it should be heading this way soon. The vice commander orders everyone to stop and draw their bows to intercept the carriage, but just as the carriage comes into view, several explosion stones fall from the sky. This was part of a carefully orchestrated airstrike with the help of Sylvie, and now that the soldiers are disoriented, the carriage drives straight through chaos. Urza uses wind magic to shield the carriage from the explosion magic, while Theron is having the time of his life throwing explosion stones at the soldiers. It's not the most elegant way of doing things, but hey, at least it worked. However, once the vice commander regains his bearings, he orders all the soldiers who are still alive to get up and chase after the carriage. They still need to keep moving to avoid being captured. Unfortunately, as a result of all the explosions, one of the carriage's wheels was blown off, and there's no way they'd be able to fix it in time, so they are going to have to continue without it. Lise tells the princess and her maids that they can ride on the horses, and Kyle plans to use Urza's Wind Walker spell to boost his speed enough to keep up with them on foot, but there's no way they'd be able to outpace the remaining soldiers like this. He says someone is going to have to stay behind and act as a decoy, and that someone is Theron. Theron has been busy trying to see if he could fix the carriage, but then Kyle tells him that it's his job to slow down the royal guards, and before Theron even gets a chance to complain, Kyle and the others have already started leaving. Soon after, the soldiers catch up to Theron, and to their surprise, they see him waving a white flag and yelling that he doesn't want to fight. The soldiers are curious, so they stop to see what Theron is up to, but it really looks like he just plans to surrender because he bows down and starts begging for forgiveness. He tells them that this whole thing was Kyle's idea, but he ditched him here, so if they let him go, he promises not to cause them any more trouble. He even offers them a huge bag of gold in exchange for his life, but as soon as the vice captain realizes that the princess isn't here anymore, he tells his men to just kill Theron so they can continue moving. Back on Kyle's end, Urza asks him if it was really alright for them to leave Theron behind because those soldiers definitely aren't going to spare him. Kyle admits that he would have preferred doing things differently so no one would have had to die, but this was the only way. Urza can't believe Kyle was really willing to sacrifice his best friend for the sake of the mission, but that's not actually what he meant. Urza would know this since it hasn't been long since she met Theron, but he is actually way stronger than Kyle or Elise. Meanwhile, Theron has just beheaded the battalion's vice commander, and his whole pathetic surrender was just a ploy to get them to lower their guard. Now that the soldiers are rattled, he takes off all of his gravity training weights and gets ready for a quick 1 versus 30. In less than a second, Theron dashes forward and effortlessly slices the heads off 3 of the soldiers. Afterwards, he runs back in to do the same to the rest of the soldiers. A few of the soldiers try to sneak up on him from behind, but Theron was already prepared for that, so he throws an explosion stone at their feet. The resulting explosion scares the soldiers' horses away, so now there's no way they can escape. Kyle explains to Urza that Theron may lack an aptitude for magic and have a questionable personality, but when it comes to sword skills, Kyle couldn't hold a candle to him. He never slacks off with his training, and he is always wearing those gravity bracelets to push himself. On top of all that, he's an extremely ruthless fighter, so Kyle would never want to have to face him in combat. However, if Theron is such a disciplined fighter, then Urza asks why he's always acting so goofy, but that's mostly just an act he puts on to make people underestimate him. Granted, he is still pretty weird regardless. Kyle has full confidence that Theron will win that battle, but up against 30 royal guards, Theron is going to have to go all out with lethal force. Kyle had hoped to resolve this without killing the soldiers since they are just following orders, but things don't always work out the way you intend. After several minutes of battle, there are now only 8 soldiers left, and Theron is starting to get tired, so he drops his sword and tells them they don't need to fight anymore. All he wanted to do was slow them down, and by now he has bought enough time for Kyle and the others to make it back to Archon. So his job is done. Besides, by now the soldiers must have realized that they aren't strong enough to defeat him, so if they leave, he's willing to let them go. The soldiers think about it for a second, and they really aren't getting paid enough to do this, so they all pick up their injured comrades and start limping away to get help. However, Theron can't leave any loose ends behind, so even though he said he would let them flee, he throws another explosion stone at the soldiers and rushes in to finish off the survivors. That seemed unnecessarily brutal, but Kyle did mention that Theron is a ruthless fighter. Meanwhile, back in Archon, Zentos realizes that someone must be interfering with his plan because he hasn't gotten any updates from his men. He decides to go out to see what happened for himself, so he leaves a few soldiers in charge of the prince and rides into the forest. Sylvie spots Zentos heading straight for the group, so she warns Kyle that a powerful knight is approaching, but a moment later, Zentos notices Sylvie and blasts her out of the sky. Kyle immediately realizes it must be Zentos since no one else would have been able to notify Sylvie or shoot her down with such accuracy, so he tells Melina to go hide in the woods for the meantime. He also asks Urza and Theron to take Melina and run if anything seems strange, but Zentos is the greatest knight in Zergus, so Melina asks Kyle if she's sure he can beat him alone. Kyle admits that he would have preferred to avoid fighting Zentos altogether, but right now, he doesn't have a choice. Melina has been wondering about this for a while now, but Kyle keeps speaking about Zentos almost as if he knows him personally, so she asks him if there's something he's hiding from her. Kyle doesn't know what to say here, but luckily Melina backs off because she doesn't want to be rude to the man who is risking his life to save her. A little while later, Zentos is riding through the forest when he finds Kyle standing in the middle of the road. Zentos asks if Kyle is the one who has been helping Melina, and Kyle confirms it, but he asks why Zentos came alone when he could have easily brought the rest of his soldiers. So Zentos explains that he doesn't want to get any more of them killed when they aren't directly involved in this. Kyle knows this is going to sound strange coming from him, but he doesn't want to kill Zentos, so he asks him if he would be willing to surrender. Kyle could even get the princess to officially pardon him, but he wants to know why Zentos did all this since he is sure Zentos isn't the kind of person to be swayed by status or money. However, Zentos says there's no point in explaining things to someone like Kyle when he's about to die anyway, so it looks like Kyle really has no choice but to fight. Zentos and Kyle draw their swords, and after casting strength and haste on themselves, they charge at each other. Zentos uses his signature illusion magic to try to throw Kyle off, but he is able to dodge and counterattack regardless, forcing Zentos to pull back. Zentos is shocked since no one has ever managed to counter his illusion magic attack on the first try before, but Kyle knows all about it because in the previous timeline, Zentos was the one who taught him everything he knows about magic swordsmanship. They continue their clash, but there isn't much Kyle can do in this situation because at this point in time, Zentos is superior to him in every way. Zentos fires several bullets at him, and while he is busy deflecting those, Zentos tries to sneak attack Kyle, but Kyle reacts in time and leaps off the sword to save himself. He then throws an explosion stone at Zentos midair, but Zentos just knocks it back at him, so Kyle suffers severe explosion damage. While he is still recovering, Zentos tries to take advantage of the situation to finish him off, but once again, Kyle reacts in time and is able to parry Zentos' attack. However, when they clash blades this time, Zentos' sword begins to crack because Kyle's sword has greater durability. Xentos is forced to back off for now, so Kyle once again asks him if he is willing to surrender because he doesn't want to see Xentos die, but he has already made his decision, and nothing is going to change his mind now. Xentos realizes he doesn't have much time left, so he needs to make a move soon so he can finish Kyle off once and for all. They both charge at each other one last time, and in a fraction of a second, Xentos managed to parry Kyle's sword, leaving him wide open for a fatal blow. However, when Xentos brings his sword down on Kyle, it shatters into pieces because Kyle had hidden the dragon tear in his armor, and that thing is practically indestructible. Now, Kyle has the upper hand, but even with the shattered sword, Xentos refuses to give up, so he attempts to shank Kyle with what's left of his blade. However, Kyle has already regained his footing, so once Xentos gets close, he brings his sword down to finish this once and for all. Before the strike lands, Kyle has a flashback to the time he spent with Xentos in the previous timeline. After a long day of training, Xentos confided in Kyle that he had always served the royal family, and he was proud to fulfill that role. But at this point in time, the kingdom of Zergus had already fallen. Kyle honestly never had a good impression of the king of Zergus, and Xentos agrees that the king wasn't a suitable ruler, but nevertheless he swore his life in service of the kingdom. However, now that Zergus has been destroyed, Xentos was no longer bound by that oath, so he felt that he could finally be free. Back to the present, with tears in his eyes, Kyle slashes through Xentos' chest, causing him to fall to his knees in defeat. Xentos asks why Kyle didn't take his head off even though he had a clear shot at it, but Kyle couldn't bring himself to do that to an old friend. However, the chest slash is still very much lethal, so Xentos passes away shortly after. Kyle knows this is a victory, but he is still devastated because the reason he began this mission was because he wanted to save all the people he treasures the most, and Xentos was one of those people. He truly wishes there was a way to keep Xentos alive, but his plan requires Melina's survival, so this is the way things turned out in the end. Back at the castle, the prince is pacing around his room, wondering why Xentos hasn't taken care of the princess yet. Just then, the room's door bursts wide open, and at first the prince thinks it's Xentos returning with good news, but to his dismay, he finds his sister alive and well, along with her personal guards. Melina wastes no time and orders Kilran to seize her brother on suspicion of assassination. She even authorizes the use of force to interrogate him, so as Melina leaves the room, you can already hear the sounds of Karn's gang beaten up for what he did. She then turns to Kyle and the others and thanks them because without their help, she would not have survived to see another day. To show her gratitude, she asks them to accompany her to the royal capital so she can properly thank them, and upon arrival, they are invited into the castle. Lise and Urza are both amazed by how fancy this place is, and Silly can hardly contain herself when she sees all the delicious sweets laid out in front of her, so she digs right in. As for Theron, he's over there in the corner, flirting with one of the maids. Kyle apologizes to Melina for the lack of etiquette, but Melina doesn't mind. Just then, her father enters the room, so Melina runs over to hug him, and the others slowly realize that if this man is Melina's father, then that must mean that he's the king. They immediately get up to show their respect, but the king tells them there's no need for formalities because right now, he's not here as a ruler, he's here as a father to thank the people who saved his daughter's life. The king says he is disappointed that Karns would do such a thing, but he can't help but wonder why Xentos would assist Karns with a plan like that. Melina hasn't been able to figure it out either, but she believes that another nation or demons might be involved somehow. However, there's no way to confirm that now, so it's pure speculation. The king tells Kyle and the others that they must not speak a word of this to anyone, and Kyle assures him that none of them would ever reveal a secret that would harm the reputation of Zergus. Melina also tells the king that it's okay to trust Kyle's team, so he takes their word for it. Not long after, details of the incident are released to the public, and the official story states that both Melina and Karns were attacked by monsters on their way to Sains, and a lot of royal soldiers were slain in the process. But thanks to the efforts of Kyle and his group, Melina was unharmed and Karns survived with only a few injuries to his face, so he will be recovering in a different country for now. A little while later, it is time for the official awards ceremony to thank Kyle and his friends for their brave heroism, so the king prepares to present them with the Saint's Medal. Today would come to be known as the first appearance of the hero, and the first step of Kyle's plan is finally complete. But there's still one more thing he has to do. Later that night, the king is drinking alone in his room, and he is cursing Karns and Xentos for being absolutely useless. At this rate, he is inevitably going to have to hand the throne over to Melina. And when that happens, he has no doubt that she will build a better kingdom, but he doesn't want that. If Melina ends up becoming a great ruler, then the king will end up as a forgotten relic of the past, and he can't stand the thought of being second to his own daughter. He decides that he needs to come up with another plan to get rid of her, but as soon as he says those words, he is grabbed from behind by Kyle. Kyle has always known that King Ramones was an incompetent leader, but he had no idea he was the kind of man to kill his own daughter out of jealousy. In the previous timeline, after the invasion began, Kyle made a suggestion to Romanus to aid the dwarves in the next kingdom over to preserve allies for the fight against the demons. However, Romanus wanted to use it as an opportunity to extort the dwarves, so he withheld aid until they were in serious danger, and by then, it was already too late. That was one of the many mistakes that Romanus made, which ultimately led to the fall of the Zergus kingdom. Kyle initially wasn't going to hold a grudge against Romanus for something he hasn't done yet, but after hearing Zentos say that he failed to accomplish the mission Romanus gave him, Kyle has changed his mind. In hindsight, it makes perfect sense because Zentos was unwaveringly loyal to the royal family, so the only one who could send him to kill the princess would be the king. So even though Zentos probably didn't want to, his duty to the king compelled him to obey his orders. Kyle drags Romanus out onto the balcony, but Romanus shows no remorse and says everything would have worked out fine if Melina had just died. But that kind of thinking is why Kyle detests Romanus. Zentor's only crime was devoting his life to such a fool, and Kyle refuses to let his reign of idiocy continue any further. Melina is a bit of a schemer, but she's actually smart, so she'd do a much better job than someone like Romanus who is only interested in self-preservation. Kyle then pushes him off the balcony, sending the king falling to his doom, and Kyle was careful to leave no evidence of his presence. So after the royal guards investigated the incident, they came to the conclusion that the king must have gotten drunk and accidentally fallen off the balcony. However, they couldn't release that story to the public, so as far as everyone else is concerned, the king suffered a heart attack in his sleep. The next day, Kyle and the others are having lunch out in the city, and by now, they've all heard the news of King Romanus' unfortunate heart attack. Urza thinks it's a weird coincidence that the king happened to suffer a heart attack the day after their awards ceremony, but Theron doesn't really care. He's just glad that the king didn't die a day earlier because then they would have had to wait for their awards ceremony. Kyle isn't having lunch with the rest of them because he is currently having a discussion with Melina, and she informs him that she is engaged to the third prince of the Gargan Empire. Kyle had no idea about this, but apparently the Zergus Kingdom and the Gargan Empire were once in conflict over the state of Karen. So to resolve the issue, a deal was struck where Zergus would get control over Karen, but in exchange, Melina was set to marry one of the princes of Gargan. However, she is thinking of calling the whole engagement off because this isn't a good time for her to get married. Kyle asks what will happen to Karen if Melina breaks the engagement deal, but she says Karen will remain as a vassal state of Zergus. Officially, there is no correlation between the engagement and the governance of Karen, so Melina can simply tell them that the circumstances have changed. With that said, she wants Kyle to go inform the governor of Karen for her since she doesn't have time to do it herself. Later that night, Kyle is deep in thought, so Sildy comes out and asks him what's wrong. Kyle tells her that he isn't sure how Gargan will react to Melina calling off the engagement, so it's hard for him to make a plan for it. Sildy can see that Kyle is really worried about this, but she thinks there's something he's overlooking here. Like the fact that Karen may be facing some major problems right now. This is all speculation, but despite the fact that the king of Zergus is dead, the governor of Karen didn't make an appearance, so something must be happening over there. And the fact that Melina didn't draw any attention to it means she must know what's going on there, so she's most likely asking Kyle to go to Karen in hopes that he may resolve the issue. If that's the case, then Kyle doesn't mind going to Karen, and besides, he'd like to stay as far away as possible from Melina. The next day, Kyle goes to meet with Melina to tell her he accepts the mission. But just when he's about to leave, Melina suddenly asks him if he would like to become her personal knight. Kyle is shocked by the sudden proposal, but Melina says she really wants to have him by her side, so appointing him as her knight is the natural choice. However, as a hero, Kyle can't let himself be tied to one nation, and he especially doesn't want to be tied to Melina, so he starts trying to politely turn her down. He says he has things he needs to do, but Melina suddenly starts laughing and says she was only joking to see how he'd react, and Kyle gets frustrated because he was totally played. As Kyle and the others are leaving, Melina is watching from her balcony when Ninos comes to check on her. She asks Melina if she was able to get Kyle to fall for her, but Melina laughs and says she's not cruel enough to play with someone's feelings like that. She may consider it in the future, but for now, she's happy just having Kyle by her side because she's going to need all the help she can get now that she's in charge of the kingdom of Zergus. Over on Kyle's end, he and the others stop by a Fezba's store to restock on items and fix up their gear. Fezba congratulates Kyle on receiving the Saint's Medal, and he is sure he will accomplish even greater things soon. On that note, Kyle tells him he will be heading to the city of Karen soon, so any information on the area would be much appreciated. Fezba has heard quite a bit about Karen, but the situation there really isn't good over there. Karen is essentially run by the Blacksmith Guild now, and they've been causing a lot of trouble, so trading with them has been difficult. With that said, the items made in Karen are of incredible quality, so they may be able to find some good weapons over there. Theron thinks it's a good idea since he has been meaning to get a new sword, so they all begin their journey to the vassal state of Khura'in. The group eventually arrives at the city of Khura'in, and it really does live up to the title of a mining city because it's practically built into the mountain here. However, Sildie comes out and informs them that the mountain was actually built around the city, not the other way around. She was around back when the city was originally founded, and it was initially flat, but when they found high-quality ore veins hidden beneath the surface, they used magic to push the earth upward so they could access those veins. That's how the mountain ended up here. Just then, the group notices something flying overhead, so they look up and spot the Wyvern Knights of the Gargan Empire. Sildie is impressed that the Empire has managed to tame wyverns, but Kyle is more concerned about why they are here in the first place. He just hopes it has nothing to do with them. They make their way into the city, and after presenting their identification, Kyle asks to talk to the ambassador of Zergus here in Khura'in. While the guard is confirming the details, the others take a look around the city, but Urza seems a little uncomfortable because elves don't have the greatest relationships with dwarves. Just then, the Zergus ambassador arrives to greet the party, and when she introduces herself as Miranda, Kyle goes mute because he recognizes her from the previous timeline, and he had no idea she was working as an ambassador at this point in time. Lise notices that Kyle is staring at Miranda way too much, so she snaps him out of it, and he informs her that they have been sent here to deliver a message from Queen Melina. Miranda invites them inside, and after looking over the official documents, she confirms that they were indeed sent by the Queen, but she has to admit that they are the strangest looking envoys she has ever seen. Although even the current state of turmoil within the kingdom, compromises are to be expected, especially with Melina in charge. Speaking of which, Miranda wants to personally thank Kyle and the others for saving Melina's life the other day because Melina is one of Miranda's close friends and she would have been devastated to lose her. Anyway, she knows they are here to meet Governor Bax of the Gargan Empire. But unfortunately, Bax has been bedridden for weeks now, so even she hasn't been able to get an audience with him. Every time she tries to get him to talk to her, she's always told that he isn't taking visitors in his current condition. But as governor, he has an obligation to meet with any envoys from the Queen, whether he wants to or not. So with Kyle and the others here, he will be forced to meet with them. Miranda tells them to follow her outside, but Kyle notices that she brought along a concerning number of guards for something that's meant to be a routine visit. Since this is just meant to be a negotiation, Theron doesn't really have anything to do, so he tells Kyle he's going to break off from the group for a while to do his own thing. Kyle doesn't mind, but he tells Theron to make sure he gets back before nighttime. As they approach the Gargan embassy, Miranda warns Kyle and the others that once they are on Gargan soil as representatives of Zergus, they won't be able to interfere whatsoever, so she wants Kyle to exercise due caution. Just then, the ambassador of Gargan happens to show up, and it's clear that he and Miranda hate each other, but their words could spark a civil war if they're not careful, so they both have to be fake nice to one another. Along with the Gargan ambassador, the second highest sorcerer of the Gargan Empire is also here, and he introduces himself as Alzard Vine. He notices Kyle standing there, and he doesn't recognize him, so he asks what business he has with the governor, and Kyle explains that he is here as an official emissary of the Queen of Zergus. After hearing that, Alzard pieces things together and realizes that Kyle must be the famous hero who saved Melina. He has been particularly interested in meeting Kyle because he used to be classmates with his mother, and the two of them had spent a lot of time together researching magic back in the day. He extends his hand for a friendly handshake, and while Kyle is a little hesitant at first, he ultimately decides that Alzard seems friendly enough, so he shakes his hand and says it's nice to meet him. But the look on Alzard's face tells me his intentions aren't the best. Both groups head over to see the governor, but just like with Miranda's previous attempts, they are stopped at the front door and told that Governor Bax refuses to take any visitors at this time. Miranda gets really upset because that's what the guard has been telling her for the past 2 months, and she's getting sick of having to beg to see the governor. The guard understands Miranda's frustration, but he's just doing his job, so he promises to inform the governor that she came. Miranda warns that if Bax isn't ready to fulfill his duties, then she's going to have to appoint a new governor, but for now she'll give him 2 days to get his act together. In the meantime, she informs Alzard that Bax isn't available for a meeting right now, and Alzard definitely seems disappointed, but he accepts it and walks away. Miranda is surprised by how easily Alzard gave up, and she's convinced that he must have known about Melina calling off the engagement. Coercion is one of the Empire's main tactics, so Alzard was probably sent here to try and strong-arm the governor into conceding to the Empire's demands. He probably also wanted to use the opportunity to curry favor with Kyle since he's an up-and-coming hero, so she tells Kyle to make sure he doesn't fall for Alzard's flattery. She also plans to appoint a new governor who is better equipped to contend with the Empire's tricks, or at least one that can manage to get out of bed every once in a while, and she has the perfect person in mind. a former member of the Blacksmith Guild and arguably the best blacksmith in Khura'in. Meanwhile, Theron is busy looking around the city, hoping to find a good sword for himself, but nothing here seems particularly exceptional, so he's not sure what to get. And to make matters worse, blacksmith cities don't have many girls around, so there's no one for him to flirt with. Just then, Theron hears someone scream, so he goes to take a look and finds a cute girl being grabbed by a group of guys. Without wasting a second, Theron jumps in and kicks one of the men across the face to get him away from the girl, and then he introduces himself to her, but Go can clearly tell that there has been a misunderstanding here, so he tells Theron that he may look cute, but he's actually a boy. Theron falls to the ground in despair because he can't believe he made such a rookie mistake. But anyway, since Go is a dude, he has lost all interest in this situation and doesn't really want to get involved anymore, so he starts walking away. Go is shocked and asks if he's really not going to save him just because he's a dude, and Theron tells him he's correct. However, after taking a few steps, Theron pauses and asks Go if he happens to have a sister who looks as cute as he does, and Go says he actually does have an older sister, so Theron is suddenly invested in helping him again. The men tell Theron to stay out of their business, but he's got a date with Go's sister on the line, so he proceeds to beat the daylights out of them until they are all unconscious on the ground. Go is really impressed since he was prepared to just run away while Theron distracted the men, but he didn't expect him to be able to beat them all on his own. Either way, he thanks Theron for his help and introduces himself as a local artificer. Theron is surprised that someone as young as Go can make magic items, but that aside, he wants to know why these guys were attacking him to begin with. Go reluctantly admits that they were debt collectors, and at first, Theron thinks Go must have been saddled with debt from his gambling-addicted parents, but no. Go's the one who got himself into debt, and it's entirely his fault. Basically, a client hired him to make a special artifact, and Go had already received the payment for it, but he wasn't clear about how long it would take. So when the client found out that it'd take 10 years to finish making it, they were understandably upset. Theron realizes Go might have deserved to get beaten up for that one, but it's not like he cares about the morality of the situation as long as he gets a date with Go's older sister. But about that, Go tells Theron that his older sister is actually married, so she probably won't go on a date with him. Upon hearing this, Theron falls to his knees in defeat again, and he asks why Go didn't mention that at the start, but he was worried that Theron wouldn't help him if he told the truth. Theron can't deny that he probably would have ditched Go if he knew his sister was married, but it doesn't change the fact that he's pissed, so he smacks Go across the head for tricking him. Meanwhile, Miranda meets with the blacksmith Gazis, and she's trying to convince him to agree to become the city's new governor, but he immediately refuses. His passion in life is blacksmithing, and if he were to become the governor, then he wouldn't have time to forge any blades, so he won't accept the position. Miranda begs him to reconsider because there are a lot of issues within the city that need to be fixed, but Gazis tells her that's not something he can help with. Kyle and the others are waiting in the corridor for Miranda to finish talking with Gazis when Theron and Go walk in. Kyle is surprised to see Theron here, but Gazis is apparently Go's father, and he's a really good craftsman, so if all goes well, Kyle thinks they might be able to get him to make a good sword for Theron. Granted, he's probably going to be busy talking with Miranda for a while, so Go invites them all to sit down and have some tea. He apologizes for the mess, but since his sister used to handle most of the chores, and since she got married and moved out a year ago, it's been hard for Go to keep things tidy here. While they are waiting for him to prepare the tea, Kyle notices a few schematics on the table, and when he takes a look at one of them, he is shocked by what he sees. Go comes over and explains that this is the magical artifact that he's meant to be fixing up, but Kyle already knows exactly what it is because in the previous timeline, this golem was an invaluable resource on the battlefield. But he had no idea that Go was the one who built it. Most of the technology to create autonomous magic items like golems was lost in ancient Xarls, but towards the end of the Great Invasion, the Gargan Empire deployed a prototype golem against the demons, and it achieved far more in battle than any humanoid soldier ever could. Kyle calls Sildi out to take a look at the golem design, and Sildi is rather impressed because the design is flawless. It is based off the titans from the ancient Xarls kingdom, but Go made a few optimizations to make it feasible to produce in this era. Kyle asks Sildi if she thinks Go's design will work out, and she tells him that it is highly likely to succeed, so Kyle gets really excited since if they can mass produce these golems, then it will be a massive advantage in their fight against the demons. Kyle tells Go to finish building it as soon as possible, but Go responds that it will take at least 10 years to complete something this complex. However, that's not good enough, so Kyle asks him to get it done within 1 year. He is willing to spend as much money as necessary to make it possible, so he tells Go not to worry about costs. Go is ecstatic to receive so much funding, but he already has a few investors who put their money into this project, so he's not sure what to do about them. Kyle says he can just tell them that the project failed, and as long as he returns the money they invested in it, they won't be able to complain. Once Kyle is done making his deal with Go, he heads back over to Gaz's office to see if he and Miranda were able to come to an agreement, but doesn't look like Gazis is willing to change his mind. Miranda says she's leaving for today, but she'll be back to talk to him again. He tells her there's nothing she could ever do to convince him to take the job. After Miranda leaves, Kyle approaches Gazis and tells him he has a request he'd like to make. Gazis assumes Kyle is going to ask him to make a sword, but he's not really taking commissions right now, so he's going to have to decline. Luckily, Go interrupts him and vouches for Kyle, so his father agrees to at least hear him out. Kyle tells him he is looking for a sword for Theron, since his current one isn't good enough, but Gazis is surprised to hear that since he recognizes the blade as the work of Adios, and there aren't many people capable enough to call a sword like this inadequate. Theron says he'd ideally want a sword similar in quality to the one Kyle has, but when Gazis takes a look at Kyle's sword, he is speechless because even among all the ancient blades from the Carl's kingdom that he has seen, only one other blade is comparable to this, and even then, this one is far better. As much as he hates to say it, he currently isn't capable of creating a sword similar to this one, so he tells Kyle and the others that they are going to have to leave for today. Theron is disappointed that he couldn't find a sword, but Gazis did mention that he has seen something like Sylvie before, so they decide to come back tomorrow to ask him about it. The next morning, Kyle gets a visit from Alzard, but it's not for any official reason. He just wants to have a chat with the son of his old friend. And of course, if Kyle is wary about being alone with him, then he is welcome to invite Miranda and his friends along. He even offers to let Kyle ride one of the wyverns, and Kyle is surprised since the wyvern riding technique is a trade secret of the Gargan Empire, but Alzard doesn't think telling Kyle will be a problem since it was his mother who originally developed the technique. Even though he's a lot older than her, he's always looked up to Kyle's mother because her talent was nothing short of legendary. Later that day, Kyle and Miranda head to the Gargan embassy to take Alzard up on his lunch offer. But as they approach the meeting room, Kyle suddenly feels a familiar chill down his spine, and upon opening the door, he finds Alzard's severed head on a plate with a demon standing over him. This was the end of episode 7. Subscribe to not miss the next part.